On this very special evening, we are pleased to have a distinguished speaker join us. With your pleasure, I'm going to move directly to the presentation of Secretary Donald Paul Hodel, who is the fourth Secretary of the U.S. Department of Energy, an office he held since November 5th, 1982. Previously, he served as an Undersecretary of the Department of the Interior. Mr. Hodel came to Washington from Hodel Associates Incorporated, an energy consulting firm he founded in 1978 in Oregon. Prior to that, he was administrator of the Bonneville Power Administration and was also in private practice in Portland for several years. I understand he is an avid skier. He is also a running enthusiast. With that, ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome Secretary Hodel. Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Dick. I think it's important for me to set the record straight. I am an avid skier. I am also a regular jogger. I jog in order to stay in shape for ski season. If any of you ever happen to see me jogging and I have a smile on my face, it's because I think I'm skiing. This is the 100th anniversary of the IEEE. I am not going to relate your history back to you, as is sometimes done in such occasions, but I am acutely aware of the major role which the IEEE has played in making the United States absolutely the leader in numerous fields in this world: science, technology, electricity, electronics, space, communications. Members of your organization have participated in major changes in the world and are continuing to participate in those changes. It is for me a great privilege to speak to you tonight and to convey the regrets of the President that he could not be with you tonight in this place as keynoter. But I perceive that a keynoter has a responsibility to provide a broad perspective. And my perspective is that the change that your members have participated in over the last 100 years has been for the better in this world. Earlier today, Dr. Jay Keyworth, the science advisor to the President, provided a summation of the administration position, which I'd like to quote: "To create a productive and supportive environment for American economic progress, we have to pay heightened attention to developing new knowledge and new talent," unquote. He laid out for you some of the budget initiatives. He talked about the federal responsibility in basic research, which he called a federal trust. He talked about our university support for faculties and for students and for new equipment in universities, and the utilization of that great American resource, the national laboratories. The budget at the Department of Energy reflects those initiatives in large measure. The President deserves credit for those initiatives, but I also like to give recognition to Dr. Keyworth for having focused the President's attention on the importance of those efforts and the need for them. In a larger context, electrotechnology is part of a larger world, a world of economics, of politics, of human attitudes. Inflation, interest rates, tax rates, investment policies are all part of that incentive system which provides the framework for electrotechnology in the United States and in the world. We have threats of war. We have burgeoning population, pollution issues. I sometimes think over the last number of years, was there a hostility to science and technology? And when I think of our own country, the United States, I think, yes, there has been hostility. Elsewhere in the world, I'm not so sure of. I don't know enough about those countries. But it sometimes seemed to me that we were asking the question that maybe the problem would go away if we would just ignore it. Well, that's wrong. I believe that learning and knowing more is better. It's better for our nation, and it's better for all mankind. Our health, our safety, nutrition, what some people call comfort, others call happiness, sometimes all under the heading of quality of life, is better because we know more and seek to know more. When I look at the world, at the international climate, I was struck. Recently, a friend of mine said to me, we, the United States, seem to be the focus of all the challenges in the world. I came back from a series of trips this last fall around the world, and I was commenting to people that what struck me in so many nations was I had the feeling that nation after nation was attempting to emulate and achieve what we have achieved in this country. There is envy of our science and of our technology, of our productivity, of our industrial might, of our educational level, and on and on. And some of those nations have chosen to target, either directly through governmental activities or in combination between government and industry, specific sectors of our economy or technology or industry. Most often it approaches me in the context, Mr. Secretary, this is during a budget process, Mr. Secretary, unless you spend money in this field, then you can substitute any nation you want. Japan, Germany, France, United Kingdom, somebody will supplant the United States as the world leader in this area. I'm always struck by the fact that I'm always being told about the areas where we're going to be supplanted. I'm never being told about the areas where we're going to supplant. Now, there are some industrial enterprises in America today which are vulnerable. They're vulnerable because of outmoded equipment or outmoded technology. Some have outmoded raw materials requirements, but they are outmoded. And we see serious problems in the industrial sector because of some of that. Today, Dr. Keyworth, I'm sure, related to you some of the recent imaginative and innovative ideas that are being utilized in the steel industry as a means of bringing together the talent and the knowledge and the scientific ability of our national laboratories and the need for some kind of leapfrogging technology in that area. Those national laboratories that are involved are a part of the Department of Energy's program, and we welcome and support the initiative which Dr. Keyworth and the steel industry are showing in that area. Government cooperation is an important element in this effort. And if the President were here tonight, having uttered those words, I think he would probably immediately turn and remind us that we also need to be careful when the government is cooperating with us, if us is in the private sector. He tells a story about the two backpackers who were off in the wild somewhere, and over the hill coming toward them came a grizzly bear. Well, the first backpacker throws down his backpack and whips out his tennis shoes and starts putting them on quickly, and the other backpacker says, "That won't do you any good. You can't outrun that grizzly bear." And the first backpacker says, "I don't have to. All I have to do is outrun you." So caveat emptor, let me warn you, buyer beware. The government's willing to cooperate. But this is an era of competition, and we need that cooperation between government and industry. We are not beaten, but we are definitely challenged. We have vast resources, we have capital, we have industry, we have a large nation which provides a large basic market for our products. But none of those are unique any longer in this world. Many other nations or groups of nations are competitive in those areas. We have a unique resource, however, and it is our talent and our technology and the combination which is provided by our determination. I think students of history will catalog the decline and fall of civilizations, and they will talk about the decay of civilizations. I believe that decadence is not simply bacchanalian orgies or materialism run wild. Decadence is also a failure of purpose and will. And this nation is no longer failing in its purpose and will. I was struck in the President's State of the Union address when he used the phrase, "America is back and standing tall." It's an inspirational phrase, and it underlies the kind of commitment and strength and determination and will which I think we see in this country again. Your title of this program includes the phrase Challenge 21, which I'm told has nothing to do with our age. It's Challenge 21, the 21st century. And that's a challenge to you and to all of us. We need to recapture that frontier spirit of innovation and ingenuity and vision. We need to make American workers the most productive and American products the most innovative that you can find in the market. And that's partly what's behind the presidential push to strengthen the talent base of America. We need to put that talent to work. We're not just talking about science in isolation or science for science sake, although I must make this point, that science for science sake, the pursuit of knowledge for the sake of knowledge, is mankind at his exalted best. And we are committed to that and are dedicated to it, as our expenditures and our support for specific programs show. But more than science for science sake, we do have to see to it that we put that talent to work. Put it to work so that we can respond to the competition which is coming to us in the commercial sector from Japan. Put it to work so that we can respond to the competition that is coming to us in the military sector from the Soviet Union. It can be argued that we dominate the world in imagination and imaginative and innovative science. We need to carry that over to the commercial sector so that we don't reach the point, as some wag put it the other day, where we become a nation with great science and technology and a Toyota in every garage and a Sony in every living room. We've come a long way in only 3 short years. We have many miles to go. At the Versailles Summit, the Williamsburg Summit, and at the coming London Summit, we see an event unfolding which is unique in human history, and certainly in the history of Western civilization, where the leaders of these nations have come together to focus on the need for science and technology. Let me quote from the Versailles Summit Executive Summary Introduction. June 1982. This is the declaration of the 7 heads of state and government and representative of the European communities. Quote, "Revitalization and growth of the world economy will depend not only on our own effort, but also to a large extent upon cooperation among our countries and with other countries in the exploitation of scientific and technological development. We have to exploit the immense opportunities presented by the new technologies, particularly for creating new employment. We need to remove barriers to and to promote the development of and trade in new technologies, both in the public sector and in the private sector. Our countries will need to train men and women in the new technologies and to create the economic, social, and cultural conditions which allow these technologies to develop and flourish." This commitment has helped to infuse our activities and our programs a lot closer to home for me, namely at the Department of Energy. I'm not going to give you a catalog of all of the programs that we have in our budget, but I'd like to mention a couple of things. We have a fusion program, a breeder reactor program, a superconducting super collider. In fact, Al Trivelpiece, Dr. Trivelpiece, who is my science advisor and head of our energy research department, said this has been a super year. He said, superconductors, supercolliders, and supercomputers. Somebody said to me the other day that the computer revolution has yet to begin. Now, I'm a layman in this field, and I have to just take his word for it. But if that's true, you can rest assured that the IEEE members are going to be in the forefront of the activities which bring about that revolution. I had a friend, the other day I was skiing with him. He, a good number of years ago, had attended engineering school, decided to go back for a refresher course. So he left, returned to school, and he walked into the first day of class carrying his slide rule. I'm not going to tell you the rest of the story. You can anticipate it. There's been a lot of change. So we have fusion, breeder reactor, superconducting supercolliders, supercomputers. Science and scientists are concerning themselves increasingly with these massive projects that require vast periods of time, massive resources, massive commitments of talent and energy. In some of those, which are both longer in time and which have a less likely early commercial activity, it seems to me that we must seek not only international cooperation, we must also seek international collaboration. Cooperation, I think we understand, communicates, provide information back and forth. Collaboration to me is a much broader term. It means that we need in some of these areas to reach the point where we are jointly scoping and designing and engineering projects. It also means that we in the United States must be willing to invest some of our money in a foreign country's activities on their soil, as distinguished from what has often been the case, I think, in the past, which is there's a temptation for us to say, we have this wonderful cooperative program, how much would you like to invest in our project in Texas or California or Ohio or Illinois or you name it? I think we need to reach the point of maturity in this relationship. And the scientific achievements of some of our allies dictate it, where we are willing to collaborate as well as cooperate. But with or without collaboration, and with or without cooperation, we must forge ahead, and we are committed to do so. In conclusion, before I try to respond to questions, let me say that it is a great privilege for me to represent the President here tonight. It's an even greater privilege for me to serve this President. I believe that his leadership has changed the course of America for the better. I believe that it has opened and continues to open the floodgates of talent in this society, that we are reawakening the sense of opportunity in America, and we must maintain that momentum. Do you remember only slightly over 4 years ago, when the question was what was wrong with America? There was a sense of malaise in the country, discouragement. They were saying in the other parts of the world that America was finally in its decline, the decay or the fall had set in. Now as I travel around America, I find a growing sense of hope and of enthusiasm, of excitement, confidence. It's in our people. It's in our people, and it infuses what they're doing. It will affect their attitudes toward science, toward scientists, toward technology. It will infuse our technology. We now have again an atmosphere for ingenuity and innovation and challenge. If we will simply turn loose the tremendous machine that is America, there is no limit to what we can and will do. I hope that we can work together to retain those things which have brought about this change, and in so doing ensure not only the future of America, but of all mankind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for those most inspiring remarks. Sir, can we indulge upon you for a few questions, please?
Some inspiring questions.
Do we have questions, please?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Mr. Secretary, nuclear power is something that you're the director, the leader of the agency that's responsible for the federal support in that area. We found, if you talk about a malaise, we've got some serious problems in nuclear power in the United States. I wonder if you might be willing to share with us what you see your department's role and how you see the future developing for nuclear power.
Did you all hear the question? Then I won't repeat it. If you didn't hear the question, you can figure it out from the answer. You're right. There are serious problems in the nuclear industry today in America. If you read the Time magazine article, it was a fascinating exposition because it laid bare these enormous financial, technical, political problems that beset this industry. And yet it concluded on a note of what I would have to call optimism, which was almost out of character with the rest of the article. In fact, there was some kidding in our office that the people who wrote all of the material up to the last 2 paragraphs were not the same people who had written the last 2 paragraphs. I don't know about that, but I think the last 2 paragraphs are correct. I think that those statements that indicate that the nuclear industry in America is dead are vastly premature. 12 to 13% of our energy, electric energy, is produced today with nuclear power. By the year 1990, we expect 18% of our electricity to be generated with nuclear power. This means we will have in operation anywhere from 120 to 130 nuclear power plants. That means further that we're going to have a tremendous call for technical and scientific ability and knowledge in that area. It means architect engineers who will be working on those plants, maintaining those plants, will be able to upgrade and maintain their design capability. And I believe when we finally come as a nation to our senses and realize that nuclear power needs to be a piece of the balanced and mixed energy system of America, that we will have the ability to go forward and make it a part. I can give you a whole speech on nuclear. I don't want to bore you with it. Just let me say, we advocate a balanced and mixed energy supply for this country and believe that balanced and mixed means that nuclear must be a piece of it, and I'm optimistic that it will be.
Are there other questions?
Yes, sir.
The cost of both primary and secondary gas seems to be going up very rapidly. Do you see any interest in the Congress on re-regulating the supply of gas, or do you think that that's a dead issue and we will continue along the lines of deregulation?
Question is, we see the price of gas rising. Do we see any interest in Congress in re-regulating, or do you think we will continue upon the course of deregulating? I went to Congress last year with a bill in behalf of the President. It was the President's bill, but one which proposed deregulation. I'd been told by the gas industry, those who advocated decontrol, Mr. Secretary, if you'll just get a bill to the Hill, we'll take it from there. I didn't know they meant take it apart. I cannot predict what will happen. We had anticipated that a cold winter would result in tremendous agitation for recontrol. That has not occurred. Apparently, America's consumers knew that it was a cold winter, recognized they were going to be paying increased absolute amounts because of increased consumption, and have not generated nearly the heat that existed last year on Congress to try to recontrol the price. At the moment, it is very close question as to whether the Senate leadership believes they can move a decontrol bill through the Senate. If they do not, nothing will happen in the House, in my estimation. In which case, we will continue under the Natural Gas Policy Act of 1978 toward a situation which means that on January 1, 1985, about half of the natural gas in America will be decontrolled, and the other half will be subject to a forever controlled price. The unfortunate thing about that is that the controlled gas is the old low-cost gas, and there's great temptation on the part of politicians to hold that price, to fix that price. And the net result is that trillions, literally trillions of cubic feet of gas will remain trapped in the ground because nobody can afford to bring it up. And so that America will be sitting on a low-cost energy resource, and we can't get it because of a government rule. Yes, sir.
Mr. Secretary, going back to get the power, I see in today's Wall Street Journal that it is possible to build a nuclear power plant within budget and almost on schedule. So with this optimistic note that the nuclear power industry will get back on track, what is your prediction for a breeder reactor?
My prediction for a breeder reactor is that the United States will maintain a technological base. We will expend a significant amount of money each year in doing so. With that, we will be able to participate, particularly with the Japanese and certainly possibly with the other countries that are proceeding with a breeder reactor. When the time comes that we need breeder technology, we will have access to it and be able to utilize it. That's a very optimistic view. Somebody may want to demand equal time. Yes, sir.
Mr. Secretary, the Department of Energy has exercised leadership in the use of supercomputers in a number of sections of the department. Is the department willing and able to take leadership in assuming a national responsibility in the supercomputer area?
Comment is that the Department of Energy has taken leadership in the past in supercomputer technology in certain parts of the Department of Energy, and are we willing to take a national responsibility for that in the future? I think the answer is a qualified yes. Take responsibility in the sense that we recognize our needs, and we recognize also that the government often is the first purchaser of such technology. And we recognize the importance of that role, and we recognize our needs, and therefore we will attempt to participate in it. We also do not anticipate that we will try to be the parties to govern or run the system. We think that there is vastly superior talent out there in the non-federal sector. But I think we expect to participate. I would expect us to be very supportive of supercomputer technologies. Yes, sir.
Mr. Secretary, I wonder if you would cite some of the department's initiatives under the Stevenson-Weisler Act, and specifically if you might talk about some of the possible spin-off applications that might occur to the long-term commitment that we all perceive necessary to fusion technology, nuclear fusion activity, in terms of the commercialization. The long road between the current experimental mode and the commercialization of that power should occur. In the context of Stevenson-Weisler, would you speculate on some of the possible spin-off technologies that might commercialize?
I'd love to speculate on that, but I think, in all honesty, I couldn't do justice to the question, to that part of your question, the Stevenson-Weisler Act part of the question. Technology transfer, which that relates to, is one of the most difficult areas that we engage in. I'm persuaded from what I've been told when I visited our national laboratories that each laboratory has a list of its achievements in this area, where they have, for instance, cryogenic technology at the Fermi Lab, spun off very advanced technologies into the private sector. But I haven't got a list that I can just spin off for you beyond that. The other part of your question relates to fusion. Let me comment about fusion for a moment. We are spending about $500 million a year on the fusion program in the United States. In order to move that program at the rate that the scientists involved in that program think it should move, we are going to need to increase that to $1 billion or more per year. I do not believe that it is realistic to expect that in the kind of budget climate we find ourselves, that level of funding will be available. The risk we run, therefore, is that we will start funding the fusion program like we've funded so many other programs, which is at the keep it alive but don't let it go anywhere level, which is a tragedy. It's a tragedy for the taxpayers, it's a tragedy for the system, and it certainly doesn't help the technology. It is my desire to pursue collaboration in the fusion area much more aggressively, because I am persuaded that other countries are facing precisely the same problem and desire to find a way to minimize their overall budget commitment while moving fusion technology forward. So I'm hoping that we can do that. I cannot promise you that it will happen. As to the technological spin-offs, again, I do not have a list of them, but we're dealing there with a series of rather esoteric subjects, including cryogenics, again, which will undoubtedly, in my estimation, have spin-offs into the private sector, and it's hoped, it's certainly to be hoped, that that will happen. Yes, sir.
Mr. Secretary, with respect to the issue of engineering versus science, are you familiar with the bill that's been introduced in the House of Representatives relating to changing the name of the National Science Foundation to the National Science and Engineering Foundation? Are you sympathetic with that cause?
This is a two-part answer. A, I am not familiar with the legislation. B, I am sympathetic to it. You meet me afterwards, I'll tell you what I mean by being sympathetic. Yes, sir.
Secretary took office, there was talk of the dismantling of DOE. What is the administration's present view with regard to DOE's role?
Good question. When I took this job 15 and a half months ago, the first thing I did was convene the employees that could fit into our cafeteria, which was our largest meeting room, and announce to them that I had tried to expunge the word dismantlement from my vocabulary. Great sigh of relief, and as it was slowly quieting away, I said, and I have substituted the word merger. In reality, there is no prospect that the Congress at the present time would consider dismantling what remains of the Department of Energy. But my predecessor and the President did an outstanding job of getting rid of the objectionable parts of this department. You may not recall, I didn't, but when I became involved in studying for the hearings, I became well informed on this subject. This department had a history of having involved itself in the day-to-day energy decisions of the American people. What you could buy, where you could buy it, who could sell it, and at what price. And that wouldn't have been so bad, except it didn't work. And as a result, in the campaign, it was popular to assault this department and say it had to be dissolved and done away with. And my predecessor and the President basically got rid of those programs which were so objected to. What remains in the department, besides the vestigial remains of that program, several $1 billion in lawsuits that we're still trying to dispose of. Besides those vestigial remains, we have the defense program sector, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, our scientific and technological activities in the national laboratories, and the power marketing agencies. Nobody in this administration is suggesting that those activities should be done away with. In fact, a number of them have received increased funding even in a budget crunch. So we do talk about our desire, if we could bring it about, to combine with some other old line department, such as Commerce or Interior, and have a Department of Energy and Natural Resources or Commerce and Energy or some such. We think administratively that would fit, it would be reasonable, it wouldn't hurt anybody's feelings, but at the present time it's one of those ideas which would die for lack of a second in the Congress if we could find somebody to introduce it in the first place. Yes, sir.
Mr. Secretary, DOE was famous and very admired department for continuing pension rights, retirement rights of engineers and professionals when contractors changed hands every 5 or 10 years. Now in the last 4 or 5 years, I understand there is an unwritten policy to dissolve that old good policy. Are you aware of that? And if so, what are you planning to do about it?
Question arose about that very subject, and I was informed that it was still our policy to do our best to maintain the difficulty, if any of you have ever been their employment. Yeah, I thought I was through almost there. Yes.
Would you entertain a question related to conservation?
Surely.
There's a cargo cliche that the U.S. representing about 5% of the world population uses some 35% of the world natural resources. You mentioned the simulation, the global simulation of the U.S. If that applies to energy consumption, basic resources, there's a pretty serious implication concerning depletion of resources. Is the department doing anything to deal with that issue very?
Yes. Did you all hear that question? Could you hear it? All right. Yes, we are. And you know, if I'd given you my normal, what we call core speech, I would have talked about our National Energy Policy Plan and our desire and objective to reduce our dependence upon imported oil, which is actually the fuel of first resort. It is our swing fuel in this society. And about the fact that our purchase of oil in the world imposes a tremendous burden on the less developed countries of this world, who do need oil as their fuel of first resort as they try to build their economic systems. And as the United States is wealthy and able to be out in the market buying large volumes of oil no matter what the price really is, we impose that burden on them. And we have an obligation, in my estimation, if we care at all about human conditions and suffering in the world, we have an obligation to try to find ways to minimize and reduce our consumption of oil. Now, we have done a great deal. Not done as much as we will and not done as much as we need to, but we've done a great deal. We have reduced our imports of oil by about half from their peak in the late 70s. We have reduced our overall consumption of oil by about 1/6 since the late 70s. As the economy is heating up again, however, we're finding that increased oil consumption is a part of it, though we do not think that we will go up to the same levels of oil consumption that we had before. We are pushing hard to try to keep pressure on for conservation and renewables. You know, it's very hard to get people excited about conservation and renewables when they hear glut, glut, glut. Very difficult problem. We got a little too much oil, unless something has happened since I came down here, which would block the Strait of Hormuz and sharply change the oil conditions of the world. We've got a little too much natural gas deliverability. We've got electrical reserve margins, which make my friends in the electric utility industry just sick at heart. They would love to sell a lot of that, not sit on it. We have coal production capacity in substantial quantities greater than consumable. And at a time like that, to urge the nation to take steps to utilize renewables and conservation as a means of reducing our dependence upon the more conventional resources, which obviously will have continued place in our system, but to reduce them at least, is very hard to do if they perceive any financial or economic disbenefit to them in the process, which they do. So we are trying to find ways to push that. We have substantially increased our budget requests in the area of conservation and renewables. We're trying to do it in the area of research. We are trying to avoid putting the federal government into the demonstration program because I'm convinced, based on the histories I've seen, that when we get into a demonstration project, two things happen. First of all, we lengthen the time period, we increase the costs. Secondly, we drive out all other investment money, and we have case histories where projects which were about to be funded in the private sector ceased to be funded and never were undertaken when the federal government announced that it was prepared to assist in finding funding for these programs. So I think that what we're trying to do is provide a broad-based support to this area. I might make the comment, you prefaced your question with the point about the old saying about how much 5% or 6% of the world's people are consuming 25, 30, 35, 40, depending on the resource, percent of the world's resources. I once heard somebody respond to that by pointing out that that same nation is producing the largest share of the world's food, it is providing energy, it is providing technology, it is providing manufactured goods and the like, health, scientific medicine and the like for that world as well. So it's not exactly an unmitigated disaster for the world, and we should not rest on our laurels, but it is important to maintain our sense of balance on that subject. Let me say I appreciate again very much the opportunity to be here tonight. When we talk about these great federal programs, I think it's important for us to remember sometimes what Will Rogers used to say. Let's be glad we don't get all the government we pay for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. This, in our centennial year, the IEEE is recognizing 100 years of service to mankind. We believe you share in that goal of serving mankind. This evening, it is my pleasure to present to you one of our centennial medals. Sir, would you please come here? This is a medal which is coined specially for our centennial. It's 1884 to 1984. It's most appropriate to recognize you, sir, with the tremendous impact that you have upon the policies and the development of this country.
Thank you very much.
I present this on behalf of the IEEE. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd permit me to introduce the head table at this time, I'd like to recognize some of the people who are in the room as our guests, and I'd like to begin with those who are seated here at the head table. In particular, I'd ask now to have our Secretary of the IEEE, Prasad Kadali, please rise. Prasad. the gentleman who is our flint-hearted treasurer, Cy Tunis. Cy, would you please rise? The Vice President for Regional Activities, Merle Buckley. Merle, would you please rise? Vice President for Publications Activities, Barry Oakes. Barry, would you please rise? Our junior, I had that wrong, didn't I? The lights glared in my eyes. Excuse me. The Vice President for Educational Activities, Barry Oakes. Would you please rise, Barry? Our junior past president, Jim Owens. Jim. Our president-elect, Don King. Don. The executive vice president of the IEEE, Henry Bachman. Henry. I'll say more about the gentleman on my immediate right in a moment, but for now I'd like to ask Vice President for United States Activities, Russel Drew, to please rise. In the room we have a number of members of the Board of Directors, and I'd like to ask those gentlemen and ladies if they please rise. The members of the Board of Directors, would you be so kind as to rise at this time? Thank you. I'm also very pleased that this evening we have a number of past presidents of the Institute who have joined us, and could ask those of you who are past presidents to also please rise. We have a number of former members of the board, members of many of the IEEE committees and major boards, and also a number of very, very distinguished guests in the audience. And I beg your indulgence that if I recognize you all as a group, and thank you so very much for all that you have contributed, that you please understand that after I've had one chance in taking care of Barry Oakes, I'm afraid I'm going to lose more friends if I try to introduce each of you individually. So with that, I'd say thank you so very much to all of you for coming and sharing with us on a most auspicious evening. The Centennial time is, of course, a very, very special occasion for the IEEE. As has been pointed out to me, that most of us will only see one centennial in the IEEE. And I think that's probably true. And with that, we've chosen to do a number of very special things to recognize the centennial. One such occasion is to present centennial medals. A few moments ago, it was my honor to present to the Secretary of Energy a centennial medal. We have struck this year 1,984 such centennial medals. That number was chosen, of course, to recognize that this is our centennial year. Those medals, in turn, have been apportioned out throughout the Institute to recognize leaders, leaders of the Institute, leaders of our communities, leaders of our nation. It is now my great honor to recognize Dr. Russel Drew, who will share with you and bring forward 3 members of the United States Activities Board who are being sponsored for centennial medals to be awarded this evening. Russ, would you please come forward? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dick. As you pointed out, the Centennial is a very special time in which we can recognize those of our members who have dedicated a great deal of their professional lives to the support of the objectives that are represented by our Institute. It's very, very difficult, and I can certainly sympathize with the groups that had to consider the candidates for such awards. This evening, we're recognizing 3 very special people. They're special because of several things. One is their strong contact with the theme and with the location and the thrust of this series of technology policy conferences. The technology policy conferences are something that the Institute has sponsored, and sponsored jointly should emphasize by the Technical Activities Board and the U.S. Activities Board. That joint sponsorship is a very important and a very treasured part of what we're trying to achieve here. We're trying to bring the technical expertise that we represent in the Institute to bear upon governmental issues, to bear upon national problems which are absolutely vital to the continuation of the kind of civilization, the kind of society that we have known and that we have grown to enjoy. I believe very strongly, and it's a personal, very strong belief, that is one of the more important tasks that we as the Institute have adopted, and it's fairly recent adoption within the last 10, 11 years, to take and to pursue. And therefore, I have to recognize that the individuals that we're going to recognize this evening are just the tip of an iceberg that we hope is going to grow and become a much bigger representation, a much bigger dedication on the part of the IEEE to this task of bringing the expertise we represent to bear on governmental policies. Now it's my great pleasure to ask, as our first recipient, a gentleman whose role in connection with the event that we're enjoying this evening is intimate, and who I think deserves all the accolades that we can bring to him for having put together such an outstanding 1984 Technology Policy Conference. Would you please step forward, Mr. Richard J. Bach.
Would you take it out? Let's take this out of here so we get a little bit of forgiveness. How about you step back over here a little bit? Just put this right here. This is the certificate that goes along with the Centennial Medal. Rick, the certificate for you.
I am rarely at a loss for words, and I'm not now. My colleagues and I agreed that we would not give any Academy Award speeches of that type, but there is one group that needs to be recognized that otherwise during this conference might not be recognized. Any volunteer that has worked with the Institute for a while has repeatedly heard from the staff about the exceptional work done by volunteers, that the strength of the Institute lies with its volunteers. I want to tell you that this conference would not have taken place had it not been for the exceptional efforts of IEEE staff. We have the finest, most energetic, enthusiastic, and professional staff in the world. It would be hard to single out any particular person at risk of alienating people, as Dick said. Certainly Lisa and Bill were in the vanguard of the effort, but everyone in New York and Washington and Piscataway were supporting this conference and everything else done by IEEE, so I'd like to hear it for the staff of IEEE.
I started to point out to you that the reason that we're able to put on such conferences, carry on the activities that have brought us, I think, a great deal of recognition in Washington, that have enabled us to bring our message to the Congress and to the executive branch, is due to the dedicated efforts of literally dozens and dozens of you volunteers that are there in the audience today and also out in the infrastructure. I feel you accept that word, that supports the IEEE. So that by recognizing the individuals that we're recognizing tonight, we're also, in a very symbolic way, recognizing a large and dedicated volunteer group, which goes well beyond the individuals and the institutions that we see every day and perhaps that are up here and represented before you. I certainly want to recognize all of you in a very important way, how important each and every one of your individual contributions are this evening. In that spirit, and recognizing the fact that the individual here has had a very broad-ranging career within the IEEE, both a division director, a vice president, a very active career as a member of the AT&T, and also, I might point out, sharing some experience as part of the U.S. Navy in his early life. An individual who I'm sure you all recognize, Edward J. Jack Doyle. Jack.
Jack, we'd like to present the Centennial Medal to you, if you may, please. It's your medal.
Thank you very much. You didn't do it. I would only like to say that I think that Russell's description of the tip of the iceberg is one of the nicest things been said about me in a long time.
The next individual that we're going to recognize has participated in a program that, I guess if you will allow me the privilege of putting a plug in for at this particular time. It's a program that the IEEE is sponsored to provide on a day-to-day basis engineering expertise in the law-making process that takes place up on the Hill. It's, of course, our Congressional Fellows program. Now, in our Congressional Fellows, we're trying to bridge a very difficult gap. We're trying to bridge the gap between the technical fields that we represent with the sort of specific, quantified view of the world, and a whole different world out there, which is the political environment up on the Hill. They talk a different language, but because of the dedicated efforts of individuals like the individual we're going to recognize next, we've been able to bridge some of that gap. We've been able to bring to the congressman and to his staff members a vital degree of understanding that we can make an important and valuable contribution in dealing with public policy development. I can report to you that we've had excellent, outstanding reports from the congressmen and their staffs where we have had Congressional Fellows. It's a great program. It's one we can be very proud of as an institute. And the next individual we'll recognize was one of our Congressional Fellows and was a great contributor to our program. He came from the Congressional Fellow experience to continue to support and to work very actively in a wide variety of programs within the IEEE. He is, I think, the wave of the future, the type of individual that we in the IEEE need to nurture, to encourage, to continue to support, continue to involve in our activities. May I ask David Lewis to come forward, please.
I really have no remarks. Dick said he was going to say it all, and I think he has. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, in addition to these three gentlemen we have recognized this evening, there are a number of other persons in this room who are receiving Centennial medals. Many have chosen to receive those at other activities. For instance, the board members will be receiving their Centennial medals in May. Others are receiving their medals at society functions, at other section functions. I'd like, however, to ask at this time that all who are receiving Centennial medals in the room to please rise so that we can properly recognize you for your achievements. Will all the Centennial medal winners please stand? I suspect by now you recognize that we had a minor change in our program order. And the fact the secretary arrived and was on a very tight schedule, and we chose to ask him to come forward without these preliminary activities. It's my great pleasure now to read to you, however, a letter which we have received, and the letter comes to us from the White House, Washington, February 17, 1984. I am delighted to extend my greetings to the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers on the occasion of its centennial celebration. From the earliest uses of electricity for lighting to today's communications and computer industries, the IEEE's history spans a remarkable century of progress in technology. Over the years, its members, now nearly 2,000 strong in the United States, have made invaluable contributions to a vital revolution in the way the fellow citizens live and work in the modern world. As the IEEE enters its second century, we can begin to anticipate the impact of continuing innovations in electrotechnology that will transform the future. From the shrinking dimensions of the microchip to the expanding horizons of space. You have shown us how to harness the delicate and powerful forces of nature and use them for the betterment of mankind. On behalf of all Americans, I wish you continued success for another 100 years of progress. It is signed, Ronald Reagan. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a very, very special evening. We're at a very important conference for the IEEE, our Centennial Technology Policy Conference. And in closing, I would again like to recognize those of you who are the participants who have come to make this conference possible for sharing your information with us. I'd also recognize the many people who have worked so very hard to let this conference come into being. The staff has been recognized by Dick Bach, and I think that's appropriate, Dick. But I think it's also appropriate that we take a moment and recognize you and your committee for the tremendous service that you have given to the IEEE and to this meeting. Would you please stand and let us recognize you? As Russel Drew has pointed, this meeting is a co-sponsored meeting by the United States Activities Board and by our Technical Activities Board. And at this time, I would like to give special recognition to the members of the board and all the support that they have provided to the meeting. May we please give them a round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes this evening's activities. Thank you so very much for being with us. Good night.
That's okay. I won't hold it against you for demoting me.
Well, you want to see something? It was right there. Sorry? It wasn't a slip. It was earlier. When you do an slip like this, one thing when you sat down here, did it yourself.
Barry, over here, Barry. All right, there it came up. I think that I'm going to give him that.